Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Pat and this is Soundwise, where we talk about guitar gear and music. Today I want to talk about the difference between playing over the changes and playing the changes. Now, as guitar players, we often want to play a guitar solo over a song, a chord progression, a vamp, something like that. And then we have to think about what are we going to play. Now in rock music, the changes, and the changes means the chords that appear underneath your solo, the changes are usually not too complicated. Most of the time they stay in one key. Compared to other types of music like jazz, where the changes are a bit more complex and involving, the changes actually help you there to make note choices. Since the chords usually don't stay in the same key for the whole of the song, you have to sort of follow the key changes in order to sound decent on top of those chords. In rock music, pop music, and maybe blues music, the changes are more straightforward and usually stay in one key. Therefore, we could be lured into the idea of let's just play notes from that key and we should be fine. And that works if a chord progression is in C, so only uses chords from the tonality of C major, so maybe A minor, D minor, E minor, G, F, C. You could get away with just playing notes of the C major scale and have your ears sort of help you finding the right notes in that scale to play over the chords. Your ears will be a better guide than your musical knowledge most of the time. So when you play something in the key of C on top of those chords, your ears will sort of help you to push you into the right direction, like, oh, this note doesn't really work, but if you bend it or if you slide towards a note that is very nearby, usually just one fret or two frets, you might sound fine. And some people do that and they sound perfect. In our guitarist brains, we have developed the idea of an even more simple approach. And that sometimes does not really help us. Now we have to go back to the blues. Now blues is a funny style of music, since it actually changes keys for every chord. So a standard blues progression is the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. But all these chords are dominant chords. Now, as you know, in any key, there's only one dominant chord, and that's on the 5th degree. So again, in C, that would be G7. That would be the only 7th chord in that tonality of C, the 5 chord. So let's take a blues in A, for example. The first chord is A7, the second chord is D7, and the third is E7. So 1, 4, 5. Now, the 1 chord is dominant chord, A7. Technically speaking, that would be the 5 chord of another key, because the 5th chord is the only dominant in any tonality. So A7 would be the 5th of D. Technically speaking, on that A7 chord, you could play a mixolydian or the notes from D major, and that would work. The second chord is D7. Now all of a sudden there's a problem. We played the notes of D major on top of the A7 chord, being the parent key of the A7 dominant chord. And the second chord is D7. In the key of D, the D chord is D major 7, not D dominant 7. Therefore, we have moved key center. And we shift into a different tonality. This time, D7 would be the 5th of another tonality. Right? So D7 is the 5th of G. So on that 4 chord in the blues progression, we could play the notes from G, or D mixolydian. It's called D mixolydian because D is the 5th degree of G. I'm playing the notes from G, but starting from the D note, it becomes a mixolydian scale in D. So on the 4th chord, you could play the notes from G. The 5th chord is E7. Now E7 is the 5th of A. So on the 5th chord, you could play E mixolydian or the notes from the A major scale. Now blues is therefore actually quite complicated. We did find out 100 plus years ago that on a blues progression, you can get away with playing a minor scale on top of a dominant chord, and it sounds bluesy. So the interaction between the minor and the major feel of a scale works really nice on a blues progression. To simplify things even more, we figured out that playing A minor pentatonic on top of all the chords in an A blues progression works as well. Not all the notes are perfect on all the chords, but your ears will push you in the right direction and will help you make the right choices. Now, the simplicity that is offered to us by a blues progression that goes from one key center to another, offering us the option to play the minor pentatonic of the first chord. So if it's blues in A, you can play A minor, you can play A minor pentatonic on all the chords. This has sort of not helped us in playing properly over the changes. Let me just recap and explain you what the pentatonic thing is about. I've done videos before where I talked about the pentatonic modes and things you can do with it and how you can use it to its full potential. Play in its most simple application, you play a minor pentatonic on top of a chord. The pentatonic sort of avoids playing too scalic. Let's say the chord is A minor to make things easy. You could play the notes from C major or A minor, its relative minor key. So if you play the notes from A minor or C major on top of an A minor chord, it may sound very scalic. Therefore, if you take 2 notes out of the 7-note scale, you only play 5 notes, hence the word pentatonic, penta meaning 5 in Latin. If you only play 5 notes, you immediately inject some more interesting vocabulary because you won't sound that scalic going up and down a ladder, but you do bigger jumps because you skip a note every now and again. And the second benefit is that you sort of avoid some avoid notes. Avoid notes are usually notes that are a half step away from the chord, from one of the chord notes that is played. These notes that are a half step away from the chord notes are not always to be avoided. I mean, there's plenty of exceptions, and even if it's an avoid note, you can make it sound interesting. Depends on what you do afterwards. But the pentatonic scale sort of avoids the problem by not going there. It just skips those notes. So the pentatonic scale offers quite a bit of solutions for a few problems. And it's because of that since we have a very straightforward, simple and easy solution to playing over some changes, we tend to use that a lot. Some people master it absolutely and develop a vocabulary just with that lasts them a lifetime, and they will sound interesting and fresh every time. They build up their arsenal of licks and riffs, and they don't need anything else. They just have that. For us, normal human beings, we might sound a bit, I'm not saying boring, but plain after a while when we just use that same pentatonic box. So therefore we have to look at different things. Now in rock music, the changes usually are rather simple. Chords are maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 chords on an outro vamp where you have to play a solo. And we tend to apply the same principle, like trying to find common ground in a minor pentatonic box and use that to play a solo over a section of a song that we want to play a solo over. And sort of avoiding the real changes. We sort of figure out what the minor pentatonic tonality can be that will fit the chords that are played, and we stick to that. That's been done in the 60s and 70s with a lot of success. And I think the grunge bands in the 90s, like Pearl Jam, did that again. They just used the same principles, playing minor pentatonic over changes. And that's what I call playing over the changes. There's changes happening. You find a tool that will fit 90% of what's happening underneath there, and you use that tool to play over the changes. And you let your ear sort of help you making the right note choices every now and again. But if you're in doubt, just play that minor pentatonic and you'll be fine. You won't sound too remote from the chords. That is what I call playing over the changes. Now, playing the changes is a tool that helps us to play more closely to the chords that are happening underneath. This is what jazz players do all the time, and that's what they call play the changes. But if you want to look more into the details of the chords and try to find notes that are actually outlining the chords instead of just outlining the tonality of that section, you may sound more interesting, and it offers you a way to break out of that pentatonic box. Now, one of the best examples of playing the changes in a rock context for me is David Gilmour. When you analyze his solos, you will find that most of the time he actually plays chord shapes in his solos. You can clearly see the D shape coming up in every solo, or a D with an added 11 shape, a C shape, a D minor or an A minor shape in a bar chord. I mean, these things happen all the time in his solos. So his solos are actually very focused on the chords, and therefore they sound really connected to the changes underneath, and they sound really melodic. And he's not locked into a minor pentatonic box. He does use that. When the solo is really melodic and you look at what he's doing, he will probably be playing chords. And that's what we do when we play the changes. You follow the chords. You look at what the chords are, and you look, first of all, the easiest way is to look at the chord shapes that you can find for that chord. I mean, if the chord is a D, you can play your D cowboy chord. You can also play D bar on the 5th fret. You can play your bar chord on the 10th fret, and then you can come back to the D shape on the 14th fret, and everything in between. Anywhere you can find a D shape somewhere on your fretboard in a chord that you already know, you can use that to incorporate in your solo. Now, a couple of months ago, I recorded a solo over Alive from Pearl Jam, and I tried to do just that, playing the changes. So when you listen to the original solo that Pearl Jam did, they play E minor pentatonic most of the time over the outro section. The outro section is the changes of the chorus, which is E, G, D, and A, 4 chords. The common ground in a pentatonic world for those 4 chords is E minor pentatonic. It works on all those 4 chords. It's a bit like in blues, because the first chord is an E, standard E, so it's not a minor chord, but you can still play the E minor pentatonic because it sounds like that bluesy feel that we talked about before when we were discussing playing over blues changes. Same principle applies here. You could play E minor pentatonic over the whole outro section. I find it quite interesting to look at the chords and see what we can do there, and then you really outline the chords, and that means that on that first chord, the E, you would play a G sharp, a major third, and then all of a sudden the whole feel of the solo changes. Now, Let's look at what I've played. You can find the full video where I've also played the verses and the vocal lines, including the outro solo, in the description below. But for now, let's just focus at what I've played during the outro section, as an example of playing the changes. So first I will let you hear the full solo, the outro solo, and I will add the chords so that you can see what the changes are, and you can try to listen and see what I'm doing to help you see or understand the fact of playing the changes. After that, I will break down the solo in short section, and I will sort of explain what I was thinking and what I'm doing on each section, so you can look at my approach of playing the changes. Okay, this first part is on, of course, the chords of E, G, D and A. So the first bit is just the root from E going to the second and the third, and then the fifth. So it's 1, 2, 3, 5. Then we go to the G chord, and I think of this shape. So your bar G chord, just outlining the chord shape. And then we go to the D chord, and I visualize this bar chord, D, A shape. Huh? And that last note is on the A chord, where I bend this one, this F sharp that is actually in this D chord. I bend this to a G, which is the seventh, the dominant seventh on the A chord. And then it ends E, D, E, and this E is back on our E chord, so that's the root of the chord. So the next part, this happens on the D, on the E chord, and this E is actually the first note on the G chord. So then that isn't 13, but this bit is on the E chord, and actually it's E minor. So it's D, E, a natural G, which is the minor third in E, so I'm playing sort of minor pentatonic there. And then from the seventh to the root of E, but that's actually happening on the G chord. And then for that For that D to A section, I just play E minor pentatonic. Not quite sure what I've played, but it's in this E minor pentatonic box that we talked about at the beginning. For this section, I just, on the E chord again, I walk up the E minor pentatonic area until I hit that B, which is the 5th. So it's something like this. The important bit is the walk to that B, which is the 5th. And then the next chord is G again. And then there's a chromatic walk. So I'm visualizing this G shape. And I walk from the 3rd to the 5th, up to the 13th, chromatically, and then to the root. And I'm on that G chord. And then there's a walk back in the pentatonic scale of E. And then this section is quite interesting, I think. So we're back on E, the first chord, and I play an E, 1, 2, 3. That's exactly the same notes as I used when I started the solo. So it's 1, 2, 3 of E, going to the 5th. And then I repeat that 1 octave higher. So 1, 3, so 1, 2, 3, 5th, 1, 2, 3, 5th, and then the 7th, the 9th, and land on the root. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 9, and then to the root. Which means this whole lick is longer than one chord, and it continues over the G chord, but that works. So I use the arpeggio of E also on the G chord, and it seems to work. So, sorry. And then the next bit, it's the D to A, and on that D to A, those two chords, I actually play an arpeggio from A, and it's something like this. This is all A with an 11th. This is this shape, and then we go to this shape, and slide to the 9th and back to the root. So for the D and A chord, I actually only use the arpeggio from A. This is just a walk from the 5th to the 6th, which sounds a bit weird, nice. To the 7th, to the root, and then the minor 3rd to the 4th. And we're back in our pentatonic box. For this bit, I just tap the chords. So the first chord is E, and I play E, G sharp, and B. Second chord is G, and I play E as the lowest note, which is the 13th or the 6th in G. Then G, which is the root, and I keep that B, which is then the 3rd from the chord. So it's for E, then. So the only note that changes is the G sharp goes to a G. And then we're on the D chord, and I play F sharp, A, and D. And for the A chord, I do exactly the same as I did with the G chord. I play the 13 or the 6th, which is the F sharp, the root, and the 3rd here. So actually the pattern is quite straightforward. The second part is just the same thing, but then I use inversions to tap the chords. So if you want to add some energy, repetition towards the end of the solo is a good idea because it adds that extra. So what I'm doing here is on that E chord. This is the 5th, which is a B, and I go back to the root, the E. And I keep that pattern going on the G chord because that B now becomes the 3rd. And that E in the bass is actually the 6th from G, so that works as well. And as an extra, you could still keep playing the same pattern over the D chord, because the pattern has been established before, and if you repeat it, keep going it, even though the chord changes beneath that, it's still perceived as a valuable option. And you can play it over that A chord as well, because the B becomes the 9th and the E is the 5th. So those two notes work over the 4 chords. This is just outlining the changes. So what I do here is, first note is a G sharp, which is the 3rd in E. So I start with the G sharp, then to an F sharp, which is a 2nd degree in E, the root, and then we go to the G chord, and then I play a natural G. To go from so now we're in G, and then we go to D, and then it becomes F sharp, so the top notes go, and actually this is just following the chord changes precisely. Last chord is an A, so I end up on a E, which is the 5th, and then I play the blue note, the minor 3rd on A, and I bend it to a major 3rd, landing on the root. It's the same trick as, so it's a very bluesy thing to do. And that outlines the 4 chords perfectly. And then that last run to the 12th fret is sometimes a bit hit and miss, because in the heat of the moment you don't really think, but this is using open strings. So I use the open D string all the time. Play 2 notes and then you pull off. Something that I use quite often. And there you go, that was a short analysis of the things I played on that outro solo from Alive by Pro Jam. I hope you enjoyed it, guys, and I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.